Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here's your host, Joe Kuzma and Zach Metkler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and I am not by myself. Finally, well, I guess not finally, but finally, I am joined by Mr. Zach Metkler. We call him the Professor of Football. He's all decked out in his Allegheny Gators gear, his busy schedule, his scouting, his recruiting, his coaching, and everything else. Zach, I kind of told everyone what your summer plans have been, man, but what's been going on? It's been about a month, and we owe some people one more episode, and we've let it go so long. Maybe the Browns fans finally ran out of steam. How you doing, my friend?
Yeah, I mean, you hit the nail on the head. It's been a whirlwind, working camps, recruiting, getting acclimated to being back at my old stopping grounds in Meadville and Meadville, PA. For those of you that don't know where that is, it's great to be back. South of Erie, north of Pittsburgh.
Yep.
Crawford County, Pennsylvania. It's good to be back. Things are slowing down here for a couple days, and then camp starts here in a couple weeks, and then I'll be dead to the world until
nah,
November,
you'll jump
December
in
sometime.
somewhere between Allegheny and Pro Football Focus and all these things. You'll find some time to talk. We were talking about podcasting equipment offline, and of course, somehow, maybe it's because you're back to the college life. We're talking about living off of Walmart and Dollar Tree and everything like that. But yeah, Meadville, Crawford County. When you say Crawford County, the only time it ever registers with me is the tornado warnings. I don't know if it's kind of like, is that kind of the common tornado area? I know just around Newcastle, Hermitage, Sharon area is Pulaski, this like tiny little town. And they had one of the biggest tornadoes that ripped through there during my upbringing over there in Northeast Ohio, just a hop skip over the Western Pennsylvania state line there. And that's what I think of when I hear Crawford County. It just brings back memories of maybe like almost like a tornado alley. I don't know.
It's that section between Erie and Interstate 80. You get all those areas. It's the snow belt, it's the rain belt, it's the hail belt, it's the tornado warning belt. Like there's a weird offset from Lake Erie coming down that way where it just seems like it pounds everybody. And the second you hit 80, you start getting down past Clary, and then you start going south towards like Grove City and Pittsburgh and Cranberry and all that. It seems like it just disappears, and then you just get humidity and rain. But everything else is just there.
It's so true, because even driving from when I lived in my hometown of Youngstown, Ohio, and for folks who may not be familiar with this, and if you're listening on audio, I can't even get myself on camera properly, but if you drew a diagonal line from Cleveland to Pittsburgh, I'm like smack dab in the middle is where I grew up, and they were still part of that snow belt, and rust belt too, the industrial part of the United States, Midwest, if you want to say. I don't know that Pennsylvania still qualifies as Midwest. You almost kind of, I guess Pittsburgh versus Philadelphia. Philadelphia, you're like East Coast, right?
I've had this argument with people before. And I'm sure this will get roasted in the comments. I have had this argument recently, and I consider Pittsburgh to be a Midwestern city more than it is an East Coast city, in my opinion.
Attaboy. I like it.
Like you hear the accents. You're west of the Appalachians. If Cleveland's a Midwestern city, then why isn't Pittsburgh a Midwestern city? You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously, you're looking at a 2.5 hour drive, but spatially, east to west, it's not that far off. I think Pittsburgh should be, in my opinion, and I'm sure a lot of people in Pittsburgh. I've heard a lot of people in Pittsburgh that are saying that will pound their fist on the table and say, "No, we're an East Coast, northeastern city. You're Midwestern."
I mean, it's kind of tough with that. Would you call Buffalo an East Coast town? I wouldn't. It's still part of that snow belt, rust belt, from like Detroit all the way to Buffalo, almost all the way out to like Rochester as well.
Yeah. I go back and forth because I struggle to consider anything in New York to be Midwestern. But if you're going to make the argument for Pittsburgh and Cleveland, I feel like Buffalo has to be in there. And again, I think you look at the mindset and mentality of those three cities. As much as fans don't admit it because they think that they're better than Cleveland or Buffalo, like the mentality and the backbone of those three cities are very similar. They're working class cities. They're all American cities.
Detroit too, man. I mean,
Detroit, those are Midwestern cities, in my opinion. I think you have to consider them to be that. And I think for whatever reason, there's a stigma, because people think Midwestern, they think Minnesota, Wisconsin, Indiana, Hoosierville. Like, they think of that type of stuff when they think of Midwestern. But, like, Western PA, Western New York, I think, fall into that area. Until, if you're west of the Appalachians, I think you at least make an argument for that. And again, I'm sure there's some, geography buff that'll be in the comments sitting there saying that we're full of it. But in my mind, I view Pittsburgh as a Midwestern city. So
I mean, those towns to me are in a different category. You don't include Columbus, Ohio, Cincinnati. Now I'm in Southern Ohio and speaking to some of the folks that may be in that area on up. As soon as you hit the Mansfield area, you're on I-71. It's the same exact thing. And I used to experience this even coming from Youngstown to Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh weather is completely different. You get down around Columbus, Ohio, the weather is completely different. There's some weird, I don't know, supernatural phenomenon. It's called the Great Lakes. It's called the lake effect. But the weather is completely different. You go from sunshine to dark clouds. It's 10 degrees colder, et cetera, et cetera. So what a sidebar to start with, right? But your recruiting area, as we were talking about too, spans all the way through everything we just about talked about. Also,
pretty much.
Yeah. So hey, everybody, if you're looking to be an Allegheny Gator, you know who to hit up. But we still have one more team on our AFC North kind of previews, predictions. Like I said, we lit a fire under Browns fans. They flock to anything they can to complain and point their finger at Steelers and anybody else and beat their chest and say that they're, the preseason Super Bowl champions every year. We may have a fan base that'll jump in here, and they're usually a little more tempered with their expectations. Are probably a lot more fair like you or I, but they're still going to have their bias, and that's the Baltimore Ravens, because we did the show on the Bengals, and I don't know, it did 30 views. No, I'm kidding. But we didn't attract the enemy so much as I think we may here, but unfortunately, the reason we probably see the Ravens as more of a rival to the Steelers, more of a threat in the AFC North, and perhaps even the take that you've already had, let the cat out of the bag. Although we think of this of all three of these teams, aside from the Bengals, we think the Steelers, Ravens, and Browns are they're the contenders for the division. I know there's only 4 teams, but they all made the postseason last year. They all on paper have contending rosters that we could see. And we also see the schedules that they have and how maybe 10 or 11 wins could take the division and they may cannibalize each other. But I was having this debate online a few days ago, and I get roasted for some of the takes, and I get it, but I'm very firm in my belief of. So I think the Steelers repeat as the division champion. I think it'll be difficult. With 7 playoff teams in the AFC, do I see them as a playoff team? Absolutely. Somebody's like, well, do you see them as a Super Bowl contender? I'm not saying they're going to win the Super Bowl, but if you get in the playoffs, that means you're a playoff contender. We've seen it happen with the Steelers as a 6th seed. Green Bay Packers were what, 5th, 6th seed? When they beat the Steelers, well, yeah. they were a wild card team too. New York Giants, when they upended the undefeated New England Patriots that year with Eli Manning, they were also a wild card team. And you saw when they got hot, Tampa Bay Buccaneers, wild card team, had to play on the road against a team with a losing record that won their division and got to host a playoff game. And then what was Taylor Heineke selling insurance or something? Like he was teaching school or something, like economics or something like that, I think. And they pull him off the street and he's a starting quarterback there, but then the Bucks go the whole way. And I was saying the same thing. It was like the Buccaneers were 7-5 before the bye, and then they could have lost any game and maybe missed the postseason. So it's one of those things where we're looking through the whole schedule with the Ravens. Where do we see them? But it's kind of relative to where I'm saying I think the Steelers are still in contention for one of those 7 spots. Is it the number 1 spot? I mean, right now, you got people asking if the Kansas City Chiefs can go undefeated. I don't think so. The Buffalo Bills, will they be as good as they were last year? I think they're the favorite in that division. I don't care who you throw in from the AFC South. They're the redheaded stepchild of the entire conference. I think they have maybe one playoff team out of their whole slate. That's where I think that of the 3 teams here, of the core here of the AFC North, and the Bengals, and nothing against them, they still got some things to work on. I think the Cleveland Browns lack some of the consistency over the years to give them the same amount of respect we're about to give the Ravens, particularly coaching and the rest of the roster. And we're going to talk about that right now, interspersed with going through some of this schedule and figuring out what the Ravens may have as far as win-loss record. Now, not to get too long-winded, just to revisit, we've had the Steelers anywhere from maybe pegged it around 10-6, maybe wiggle room, not 10-6, I'm sorry, 10-7, 11-6, somewhere with that, but primarily 10-11 wins. We think they could reach double digits. They could hit 9. We had the Cleveland Browns. Let me see. We had the Browns wiggle room ±2. So we thought they could be a 10-win team as well, double digits. We see some losses there. We see some coin flips. We mostly see it within their own division. And then the Bengals, we said probably 6-win team, maybe 6-11. Something of that nature. I just think it's just too difficult of a division. We take a look at the way the schedules are set up between the Steelers, Ravens. Everyone's going to say the Steelers, though, they have the hardest schedule. They have the hardest strength of schedule. Right now, because it's based on last year's records, they're playing the NFC North, where the Bears made the playoffs. And I don't necessarily know that the Bears are still a playoff team. You still get to play against the Lions, who are just always a dumpster fire and in the basement. I don't think they've improved any this offseason. New coaching staff and some of their changes. It's an uphill battle for Jared Goff. I don't even know. Who's he throwing the ball to? DeAndre Swift, who's he handing off to? Maybe. We'll see how that ends up.
Kenny Galladay.
Yeah, the Vikings, they're constant turmoil. They're always around a 500 team. They had some major issues with injuries and stuff last year, so maybe they bounce back. Kirk Cousins was better than he had been, but probably not living up to his big billing. And then we don't know about the Packers either. Aaron Rodgers going to be there or not? Jordan Love going to be any good? So you got to take that into consideration, because anyone who has the Jacksonville Jaguars, who tanked to get Trevor Lawrence on their schedule this year, that curves, that statistic for strength of schedule, that percentage is going to be much weaker because it's a one-win team. And so when I look at this and I see the changes, the Steelers have the Buffalo Bills, Seattle Seahawks, and I'm trying to think of the other one. I have it here documented somewhere, Zach. I'm going to pull it up here in a second and get your opinions on this before we proceed into the Ravens. But I think the Ravens are actually rated as the 5th hardest schedule this year, I do believe. And the Browns,
the 3 teams are in the top. They're on the top 6.
Yeah, they're in the top 6. And it's all AFC North and NFC North teams, and that's not any coincidence because they're all playing each other.
Correct. Yeah, I think the Packers, is the other guy you're looking for there for the Steelers. In terms of the first place teams, and that's, Well, no, they all play. They're going to play the entire division. So the North. You're right. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I think the thing that people get lost on their mind is the fact that, you see teams that had a flash in the pan year, they absolutely crush it in one season, and that adds to the strength of schedule. Then they turn around and they go 4-13. I mean, you look at the 49ers. The 49ers instantly made any team that played them last year strength of schedule look harder going into there. And then what they end up doing, Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt. They have 20-some guys, 30-some guys that end up on IR or end up missing time at some point in time. And all of a sudden you look at a team that then's back in the picking, early again. So, stuff happens. Injuries happen. And that's why making these predictions and, saying, it's going to be the hardest strength of schedule and all these teams are going to have the identical record to last year, and that's going to be difficult for the Steelers. There's going to be teams on this schedule that add in a very hard fashion to the Steelers' strength of schedule that end up being busts of teams this year that miss the playoffs, are bottom of the barrel, middle of the pack teams that, at this point when we haven't seen anybody go, every team's a championship contender. Every team's going 17-0 except for the Steelers, because they're going to go, 6-11 or 6-11 or whatever.
Math, man.
Every other team is going to be 17-0, but the Steelers will be 6-11 somehow.
The Ravens are going 17-0. We're predicting that today, actually.
Yeah, they're going 17-0. So roll the credits. We're done. It's people get too hyped up with strength of schedule. All the teams in the AFC North have it. Have the difficult strength of schedule. The Steelers had had an easy road last year, and everyone talked about that. But then no one ever talked about the fact that the Ravens and Browns had a very similar strength of schedule. Steelers have a difficult schedule this year, and everyone's talking about that. No one's talking about the Ravens and Browns having their difficult schedule as well because of, they're patched up with the second place team and the third place team as opposed to the first place team like the Steelers are. Who's to say that that's going to make a difference when it's all said and done, So to me, it's, the strength of schedule thing, it doesn't matter because every year is a new year. There's so much parity in the NFL that there's going to be teams that everyone thought were going to be pushovers this year, and like the Jaguars were in 2017, like 16, all of a sudden 2017, they're making it to the AFC Championship game because everyone expected Blake Bortles to do that, right? So you never know what teams are going to emerge and what teams are going to take massive steps backward. And, just because a team did well one year doesn't mean they're destined to have success the following year. Unless, of course, more than likely your quarterback's Pat Mahomes or Tom Brady. So,
I had an interesting take on Twitter too. I said it wouldn't surprise me if you told me 10 years from now that Patrick Mahomes didn't win another Super Bowl.
Won't surprise me.
It's not to say he couldn't. It's just to say how difficult it is to win a Super Bowl. And that was kind of my point with the comment that was made to me was the Steelers are closer to a top 10 draft pick next year than winning the Super Bowl. And if you put them in the top 7 teams that are going to make the postseason, you got another 9 teams, 16 in each conference. Both conferences, there's 18 teams now that are at least a minimum ahead. So you have almost 8 to 10 spots depending on where the Steelers finish. If you believe they're a 10-win, 11-win team that makes the postseason, which we believe they are, that's like 18, 20 picks between. They're actually closer to the Super Bowl. And it doesn't mean they're going to get there by any means. And we've said this a million times. It's like Tony Dungy and Peyton Manning got 1. Drew Brees and Sean Payton got 1. Ben's fortunate to have 2. But Tomlin only has 1. Cowher only has 1. Aaron Rodgers has 1. Tough to win a Super Bowl. Very tough. The Tom Brady thing is a phenomenon we'll probably be lucky to ever see again in maybe in my lifetime. Maybe they expand to 50 teams in the NFL and it makes it even harder, or it just waters down the competition and one team's a dynasty more than the rest. But digging into the Ravens while you were discussing this, back to the schedule comparisons real quick, strength of schedule. Here's the reason that it's like, okay, aside from the strength of schedule thing, which we're like, yeah, okay, roll your eyes. I think the Steelers had that same critique 2017 maybe, possibly, and then they won 13 games. So I don't worry about any of this. Parity in the NFL is something else, and you always see teams that win on weeks that they probably shouldn't, or vice versa. Team has a bad day, team has a good day. The main difference here when it comes to the schedules, you got the Steelers will have that NFC opponent, like common finish or whatever it was last year, and then they get the common finish opponents. Of course, they get the winners of the divisions from last year, the other 2 divisions that is not the common opponent, so that will be the AFC East and the AFC South. It means the Steelers have the Buffalo Bills, the Tennessee Titans, and the Seattle Seahawks. Now, you put that up against the Browns having the New England Patriots, Houston Texans, and Arizona Cardinals. It's kind of an interesting comparison there. Yeah, I might on paper prefer Patriots always have the Steelers number, so I might not necessarily prefer that. And I think they'll be a better team than they were last year. So that doesn't necessarily mean the Patriots are going to be an easier opponent than the Bills for the Steelers or the Browns. You know what I mean? But the Texans and Cardinals, I think the Cardinals will be a strong team. And I forget, does Cleveland play them on the road? Some of that has plays into some of this too, and I carried over some of our previous thoughts from the other shows. So I already have the Ravens kind of plugged in here, Zach, as far as some of their wins, losses, and how we feel they'll finish against the Browns and the Bengals. I almost said the Ravens again. Jesus. The Ravens, on the other hand, they get the Dolphins. I don't know what that means for this year. The Dolphins could be a solid team. They looked like they were going to be maybe a playoff contender and kind of imploded near the end. And then they have the Colts and the Rams. I mean, that's such an interesting kind of mix here. So when you're comparing these, when it comes to the AFC East, I think the Ravens get maybe on paper the easiest opponent, but all these teams are better teams than they used to be. Between the Bills, the Patriots are probably down from their dynasty, but they're better than they were last year, at least on paper right now, and then the Dolphins. And then you've got the Steelers with the Titans, Browns with the Texans, Ravens with the Colts. I would take the Texans out of that, so Cleveland gets a little bit easier. And then just shoot your shot here on the NFC West, Seahawks, Cardinals, Rams. Like, I wouldn't look forward to seeing any of those teams on the schedule, but Seattle coming to Pittsburgh, I'd probably take Seattle. Arizona, you got a mobile quarterback. Well, I guess you still got Russell Wilson. He's one of my favorite players. I can't downplay him. So just saying, in saying this, when you're saying the rest of the schedule is identical. So that's my point. Aside from 3 games, the other 14 games are identical for the Browns and Ravens. And that's why we think the division and some of these records will be what they're going to be. We're not necessarily, I think, predicting 13, 14 wins for any of these teams as we've been doing it. So keep that in mind. That's where our thought process is from. I know I'm talking a lot. Let's jump to week 1. Ravens, they're on the road 3 of the first 4 weeks, man. They got the Las Vegas Raiders. Unlike the Steelers, unlike the Seahawks, unlike some of these other teams that play preseason football in the first week, John Harbaugh usually has the Ravens ready at Vegas, 8 o'clock, opening of that new stadium. It's going to be a raucous place, but I just don't think that the Raiders are going to have their stuff together. I think that could be 40 points laid on them easily by the Ravens, unfortunately, as we see in each of the Ravens openers over the last few years.
Yeah, Ravens are just strong week 1, point blank period. There's no point in me saying more than that. You know, like, they're always strong week 1, and I don't know what the Raiders are at this point. You know, so I think the Ravens win that game handily. I think it'll have vibes of that Ravens Miami game week 1 a couple years ago, whenever Lamar Jackson was like, "Hey, I'm here." I think the Raiders will give a bigger fight than that, but I still think that's the type of performance I'd expect to see with the Ravens that week.
Yeah, 38-6 last year over the Browns. You go back to 2018, they put 47-3 on the Buffalo Bills.
Yep.
You got to go back a little bit to see 20-0 on the Bengals. Do they lose in week 1 ever?
John Harbaugh just has them ready to go.
13-7 against the Bills back in whatever. And this was back 2016 when they finished 8-8, but they started 3-0 and then dropped 4 in a row before a bye week. And that may have been I remember this game pretty distinctly because they came off the bye and then beat the Steelers, and everybody was totally PO'd about that back in 2016. That was a stinkeroo of a game. A lot of them end up being that way. You get so excited about Steelers, but Ravens Steelers, and then it's like it's not the result that necessarily we would want or care for. And we have them splitting a lot here within the division, but we'll get to those games here shortly because they don't have a AFC North opponent until Week 7. Their lone home game here in the first 4 weeks of the season, they host the Kansas City Chiefs, another primetime game. And on the short week, though, after coming from the West Coast and coming from Vegas, I can't. I don't know that I could see them get. It's almost a coin flip because they've been very competitive with the Kansas City Chiefs, but I think there's some things at play that we need to discuss too. The comparisons between the Ravens and the Steelers have not been all fair. Somebody told me it's because they have an elite quarterback in Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson, who, how many pass attempts does he usually have in a season? It's not to disparage him. I don't call him a running back. I've been very fair in saying that he's a quarterback. But 376 attempts, is that top 32 even compared to some other guys? Yes. I'm going to pull up some passing stats, man. I mean, they primarily run the football. And the flip side of this is, yeah, they're a top rushing team. They run everything out of shotgun. So that's like this knock on the Steelers. Well, Ben needs to play under center more. No, it doesn't matter. But they were the worst passing team in NFL last year. And somebody said, well, they have a wide receiver 1 now. And I'm like, who? Is it going to be Bateman?
Sammy Watkins.
Sammy Watkins is not a 1,000-yard receiver. One time in his career, he's had like 5 touchdowns in the last 3 years or something ridiculous, maybe 7. It's like 2, 2, and 3 or something like that. And
don't get me wrong, I love Bateman. I love Bateman. He was my receiver too. I just, until I see him play, I'm not going to call him, the savior. I don't think Marquise Brown's it. I'd be surprised he gets a second contract, and Sammy Watkins is an all right number 2 and 3. I still don't think they really truly solved their receiver problem. I know they drafted someone else as well. I'm drawing a blank off the top of my head, but I think that they're serviceable for what they do. And I think Bateman and Watkins, I hate to say this, are both upgrades over Brown. I'm not a fan of Brown. Wasn't a fan of him coming out. I was surprised that they went for that. He's had flashes, but he hasn't been able to put it together consistently. Bateman should be able to be better than that, and Watkins should be able to be more consistent than that. So I think the room is better, but I don't think they have, until Bateman steps up and, does it, they don't have a true bona fide number one right now as we're doing this podcast. They come back to me week 5, maybe Bateman's separated himself, maybe Marquise Brown finally clicked, or maybe Sammy Watkins is stepping up and having one of his, random 100-yard, 3-touchdown games he was, inclined to have when he was with the Chiefs, but we'll see. I don't know.
I mean, this is where I put it, too. Okay, so Jackson, of course, I was being facetious, top 32, but he was 24th in attempts overall. And completions, same thing, 24th. Completion percentage, 27th. This is among all the eligible ranked quarterbacks or anybody who threw a pass last year, if you're going to call him a running back. I mean, dynamic player, don't get me wrong. Elusive, elite speed. Are they going to force passing too much that they get away from what's worked for them and won games, too? We saw the Steelers try to change their identity mid-season last year, and it was not for the better against the Browns. Oh, my God. Or not the Browns, but the Bengals at Cincinnati in primetime, just looking atrocious. Jackson tied for 12th, 26 touchdown passes with Kyler Murray, Matt Ryan, Matt Stafford, and Baker Mayfield. Adequate as a quarterback, but 2757 passing yards. And by the way, Derek Carr threw 27 touchdown passes, actually one more. So it's like, how elite do you want to say Derek Carr is in the NFL? It's a tough argument. 22nd overall in passing yards was Lamar Jackson. Playing 15 games, he only sat the one out. Drew Lock actually threw for more yards, but he also had a very abysmal completion percentage, 57.3. So, I mean, you could give and take the scales of balance here. I don't want to necessarily call him a game manager because the Ravens aren't running the same type of offensive schemes or system as anyone else. Mark Andrews is obviously his top target. The tight ends have been a focal point, obviously, because they block. They can run some play action. These guys could squeak open. The offensive line, we've said this before too, very much a same comparison to the Steelers where they're moving a guard over. Bozeman's going over from guard to center. That's their hope. They've had a few different starting centers over the last few years.
Can't be worse than Matt Skura. So
yeah, and who's coming back off of injury now? His name's escaped me. They traded what? They traded Orlando Brown.
Ronnie Stanley's coming back, and he's the best. He's the best offensive lineman in the AFC North, in my opinion. So like that's a huge get for them coming back.
The Steelers had a terrible offensive line with a guy who couldn't he couldn't pass block or couldn't run block. For a team that primarily run blocks, they bring him in, and that's Alejandro Villanueva, 30-some years old. Kevin Zeitler, 30-some years old. I think Zeitler's 32. Is Villanueva 33, maybe? 34. I'm pulling that up right now. 32. He's 32, will be 33 here September 22nd. So that's coming in for Marshall Yanda. So Zeitler is coming in for Marshall Yanda, who retired. Zeitler's 31. So, I mean, there's a lot of the similarities, a lot of the same things that people were saying about the Steelers. And then, of course, they have like a 3rd or 4th round draft pick in Cleveland. That's his name. That will be one of the other guards is what they're penciling him in as right now. So you got a lot of changeover. You got a guy coming off an injury. There's so many parallels with the same thing with the Steelers, with Kendrick Green being a rookie going from guard to center, and bringing in another guy from another team who used to be a Pro Bowler, and Trey Turner coming in for David DeCastro, and you've got a middle round pick in his second year going to play guard. You've got Zach Banner coming from a knee injury. A lot of the same things going in motion here for the Ravens. I bring all this up because with the Chiefs, I look at that. I look at the offensive line. I look at a potential Chiefs, maybe whatever type of pass rush they have, their defense matching up. I look at some of the holes on the Ravens defense. Yeah, they still have Calais Campbell, one of the premier defenders in the entire National Football League. Brandon Williams. Trying to think who else. So Patrick Queen's a young man in the middle of that defense. Their secondary safeties may be more suspect. This isn't Eric Weddle and Earl Thomas. They did more than an adequate job last year. The corners, I always think Marcus Peters, not always up. He creates splash plays, but maybe not always the best in coverage. Marlon Humphrey, premier corner. So they've got the corners there. They lost Matt Judon, premier pass rusher. and we're going to see who ends up coming in. They have the one draft pick was at Owe and Tyus Bowser, who's been there. It's kind of that Terrell Suggs position that's played on their defense. So how does this match up with the Kansas City Chiefs, who's been in the AFC Championship in each of the last 3 years, playing at home at Baltimore, primetime game? I could coin flip this. I could coin flip it. I think I'm going to coin flip it, but I could also see this going the Ravens' way and them starting 2-0, and then all the hype machine's going to start there because we've already had the Steelers at maybe like 1-1. Is their season over? The Browns could even start 2-0 that we've said too. But they get the Ravens, they get the Chiefs in week 1, unlike the Ravens. So the Ravens see the Chiefs see 2 AFC North teams. I'm getting tongue twisted here, back to back in the Browns and the Ravens. I don't know, man. It's again, this is all on paper. It's kind of for fun, and we're trying to throw out predictions and without injuries and knowing anything else about these teams. But that's a pretty big, high-profile game and 2 primetime games to start. They're at home, but they're also on a shorter week. It's a tough one for me to call.
Yeah, I think at this point, I'm giving it a loss because I think of all the games, I'd be surprised if they're 7-0 going into their Week 8 game, as high as on the Ravens as I am. I definitely think that their front half schedule is easier than their back half schedule. Not saying that like teams like the Chargers aren't going to be competitive. I'm not saying teams like, Indianapolis, if, Carson Wentz can, re-find his former, MVP caliber self, that could be a tough out as well. But I think the Chiefs are easily the hard game on that first part of the schedule for the Ravens, just as of right now. So for me, I think it will be close. I think the Ravens have played the Chiefs tough in the past. Going back real quick to, Lamar Jackson, I don't hurt him as running back either because he's electrifying. He does extraordinarily well in the red zone. The touchdown numbers speak for themselves, whether they're rushing or passing touchdowns. The guy is 30-7 so far as a pro. So say what you want about him. He finally got that over that hump, with that daunting first playoff win last year. That was always my biggest criticism of him, in 2 playoff starts, 2 losses and 2 early exits. And I always said until he wins in the playoffs, I don't care what happens there. And that's the same logic people use for the Steelers. It doesn't matter what you do in the regular season if you don't win in the playoffs. Well, it was the same thing for Lamar Jackson. Lamar Jackson hadn't done anything. That's great. He won the league MVP. Then he went and he whiffed in the playoffs. So like in my mind, he's fine. He's an electrifying player. There's always going to be a threat as long as he stays healthy with him to have effectiveness on the ground with his legs. And I just think that when you look at what his arm has done, it's gotten better. He's progressed each season he's been in the NFL. I don't think in this, I don't think his arm will ever be Pat Mahomes, Aaron Rodgers, Ben in his prime. And I don't think it has to be for him to be an effective quarterback in the NFL, for him to be this guy that they're talking about paying $40+ million a year and on his contract extension. I think he'll get that because of he's a former MVP on his rookie deal. And he's just so electrifying that if he stays healthy, which really he has, with the exception of COVID last year, he's going to be a rusher. He's going to be able to get yards on the ground with his legs. He's going to be extremely effective in the red zone, and they have the clearest cut offensive identity of any team in the NFL, in my opinion, at least in the AFC North. The Browns obviously have their identity at this point in time, but the Ravens, you've known what they've been now for 2 years, going on 3 years. So in my mind, like that's what's going to make them be at that point, depending on how the defense reacts with some of these new pieces. But I still think this early season, like as much as I trust the Ravens to be good to go early in the season, I feel the same way about Andy Reid and the Chiefs. Andy Reid and the Chiefs always seem to be consistently solid in the beginning of the year as well. Even before Pat Mahomes came into town. So in my mind, I think that's a loss at this point without knowing anything else. So in my mind, I think this is probably the Lamar Jackson, fights his tail off. I think they do well. So I don't think they just roll over and take a loss at home in prime time. It's the same thing as the Steelers. You don't see the Steelers just rolling over in prime time at home very often. I'm sure some Browns fan will chime in there with some wild card number for me again, but I think realistically, like the Ravens do well in prime time the same way.
It was 1 quarter.
It's 1 quarter in one game. Yep. So and that means now defines their entire history. I think the Ravens will recover from that loss against the Chiefs, but I do think they lose to the Chiefs, and that's not because I'm not saying they couldn't come back and beat them in the playoffs. I just think early in the season, 2 very well coached teams, 2 very solid teams. I just think, like you talk about those additions the Chiefs have had to their offensive line and just the pieces they've kind of put together bolster what was obviously in my mind, what a painful Super Bowl was to watch, Pat Mahomes run around for his life. And when you have that price tag on that guy who's quite literally the face of your organization for the next decade or more, you got to get something there. So in my mind, like I just think the Chiefs win that game. So long way around getting to the point where I think that's a 1-1 start there. So
yeah, you know what? You talked me into it. I'm going to mark it down as a loss. I mean, it's one of those gut things where I think it could go either way.
Yeah, the Ravens are going to roll over, but I just think it's a hard game for them to come off a West Coast short week.
Yeah, there was a lot to chew off there too for both of us because we got to kind of not only look at what the Ravens have, but also that's where we're coming up with this. We're not just pulling it from thin air. And I'd be remiss to not mention the stable of running backs too. J.K. Dobbins. I don't know what Todd Gurley offers, but if he's only carrying the rock 5 or 6 times, it might still be suitable. Some spot duty. We'll see there. There's still Gus Edwards, who I despise for having a nickname of a Hall of Fame Steelers player. You do not call yourself the bus. There's only one bus, and there's only one bus driver who's going in here shortly too with Alan Faneca. And Justice Hill, who we liked, it just seems like he's not their cup of tea. He's not going to end up being, what do you want to say, an integral part of their offensive plans, I think, going forward. And you kind of you jump through, you don't want to see them go 7-0. They have a week 8 bye, and it's easy to kind of start jumping into, after mentioning all of that, what goes on with some of these other games. Yeah, they're on the road at Detroit. Big deal. Okay, W.
Yeah. I don't know who or what Detroit is and is going to be under Dan Campbell until I see anything.
1 or 2 win team, maybe.
Maybe. It wouldn't surprise me if they're a top 10 team again this upcoming year.
I mean, I get Jared Goff gutted it through, dislocated finger and everything else like that, but I've just never seen him as being the truth or whatever for any franchise, and I think he goes into a worse situation with
the less weapons, not as effective coaching as they had with the Rams, not the same exact type of fan base.
Just the whole thing is just backwards. He's going upside down. Denver Broncos, this is a late afternoon game at Denver, Mile High. We don't know what Denver's identity could be. I had somebody float this by me too. Well, if Denver gets Aaron Rodgers, that's a giant what if. I think Aaron Rodgers sits out or retires before he goes to Denver. That's just me. I know John Elway, even though he's got another general manager there and everything else or whatever of operations, he still calls the shots. He's the puppet master. He's a ruthless guy that'll make moves to get like a Peyton Manning or whatever. They have not been able to sort out their quarterback situation. There's a lot of young talent, though, on that team. Depends on who's throwing the ball. Is Drew Lock getting his second chance? Is Teddy Bridgewater the starter who's effective? Kind of surprised that the Panthers moved on from him or even the Saints. So there's something there that lends to your opinion of Teddy Bridgewater with those two programs, moving on from him. And now in Denver, where you got like Cortland Sutton and Noah Fant and Javonte Williams, and maybe they'll still have Melvin Gordon in the backfield and some of these guys. I don't know. I think he could be a casualty. You never know, or a camp casualty, I should say. I think the Ravens have a history of losing in Denver, kind of like the Steelers losing in Oakland. And that's the only way I could see it. It just kind of flops. The Mile High, they're gassed. 3 of the 4 games on the road. The one at home that they lose to the Chiefs. But I think they should be adequately prepared to play this afternoon game in Denver, kind of West Coast type trip. I'll give them a W there because as much as I think, there's Justin Simmons, you still have Von Miller and some of these guys, Bradley Chubb. There still is pretty solid defense in Denver, but like you said, what kind of identity does this team have? They still haven't found it. Will they find it by week 4 and be more prepared than the Ravens, who have already had 3 games and probably figured it out earlier and been doing the same thing for a few years? Probably not. So I could see them picking up a win against the Broncos.
Yeah, I mean, the Broncos are also just very solid at home traditionally. So, Drew Lock's on his last leg, in my opinion. Teddy Bridgewater's on kind of a prove it. Hey, trade it for me. Let's see if we can get something going before we hopefully find quarterback future. Either it's Bridgewater or if it's somebody else, and I think they have pieces. Their defense is going to be just fine. Like you said, they have pieces on all 3 levels of the defense there. Offensive line-wise, like they have weapons on offense. Like they don't, quarterback's always going to be a concern for me until they find it. Until they find a quarterback, I'm not taking the Broncos tremendously seriously. But I think at home, I think they're a tough out for a team that's going to be probably looking at another top 10, top 12 pick next year. But I think the Ravens are just the better football team there.
They host 3 straight home games. They got the Colts for another primetime game. A lot of Ravens we're going to be seeing early on in this season against the Colts. Monday night, Carson Wentz, Frank Reich. Does Carson Wentz turn back into the Cinderella story he used to be? I don't know. It's certainly a talented roster. This is a team that could be on the cusp of playoff contention. I'm just like, do they rip off 5 straight wins? It's not necessarily improbable before a bye week. They have the Chargers right after that. It's a short week, but the Chargers come to them for a 1 o'clock start, which that doesn't bode too well for a Chargers team. This is a whole new mix. We don't know what the Chargers are going to look like. I'm more inclined to give them a W for sure against the Chargers. We've already given them the W before with our Bengals preview. So it's like, do they rip off 5 in a row here, or are they prone to lose one of these games just by the law of probability?
I mean, I think they beat the Chargers. I do think the Chargers are a dark horse team for a wild card spot. I mean, it's the Chiefs division, in my opinion, but like, pending Pat Mahomes' health. But I think the Chargers are the pick for number 2 in that division. I think, Justin Herbert takes a jump. Obviously, we'll see what Brandon Staley can do as a head coach, but I think that the Chargers have the weapons there. And I think, Justin Herbert's the real deal. I think he's the future face of the NFL in some capacity. But Indianapolis, I think they have one of the best rosters with a little asterisk next to quarterback, because if Carson Wentz comes back and is healthy and can regain his mojo that saw him become, at the time when he signed the highest paid player in the NFL, I think that they're fine. And I mean, the Colts admittedly are my pick to win the AFC South, because I don't trust, what the Titans might be without Arthur Smith on that leading that offense. I like Mike Vrabel. Arthur Smith is, I think, one of the least talked about but massive changes that any NFL team took this year, because it was him that really got the most out of Tannehill and got the most out of Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry also obviously is a grown-ass man on his own, but like Ryan Tannehill really took strides as a quarterback that was so efficient and effective. Can he replicate that without Arthur Smith? If he can, then the Titans, I think, obviously are the just more proven team and have the better quarterback situation there. But the Colts roster is very good on both sides of the ball, up front, at receiver, in the backfield. And Jonathan Taylor, I think, is going to be an emerging player. That defense has players all over the point. Darius Leonard's going to, make $19-20 million here probably before week 1 even gets around. So in my mind, I really think that you're looking at a team that could go any way during the course of the season. They could be a team that all of a sudden surprises and goes 12-5, 11-6. They could be another, dumpster fire because they can't find consistent quarterback play, and all of a sudden you're seeing, Jacob Eason or something like that in there under center if Carson Wentz doesn't get the job done. So, for me, I want to call this a loss, but my gut just tells me that if the Ravens can control the clock and get the pressure, if they're front seven and get the pressure on Carson Wentz, I think that's a win for him. And I'm not saying that I think and truly feel the Ravens are going to go at that point 6-1 going into the bye week, but like it wouldn't surprise me if they were in there, because like I said, I think their front half schedule is far easier than their back half schedule. I think they get like a lot of those kind of questionable teams out of the way earlier, minus the Chiefs. So being 6-1 wouldn't surprise me at that point in time. Just because the way the schedule fell, with maybe 1 or 2 of those games, like I said, the Chargers and the Colts, I'm not sure. Those could both be losses depending on which version of those teams show up. They could both be wins because the Ravens are playing at home and they're forcing, a West Coast team to come play them at 1 o'clock. They're forcing a team like the Colts to go on the road. Could maybe, at that point, you're looking at mid-October weather in Baltimore. It could be kind of crummy. It could be rainy. You never know. Who knows how they're going to play in that condition. So it could go either way, but I really feel on the top of my mind that it'd be 6-1 going into the bye week at that point.
Night game in October, certainly. Yeah, it seems like, wow, all of a sudden this is the front runner in the AFC with the exception of a loss to the Chiefs. And who knows? We didn't really look at the Chiefs' schedule to see if we got them in a similar position. They finish a bye week, and then they host another home game. This is absolutely phenomenal that they go October 11th. So they go from being on the road October 3rd at Denver, and they don't go on the road again until November 11th, a Thursday night game at Miami, another primetime game. So they got a bye week, November 7th against the Minnesota Vikings at home, regularly scheduled 1 o'clock. I don't necessarily care too much for what the Vikings have. I can give them a W against the Vikings, Zach, but what I'm going to end up doing, and this may come as a surprise to a lot of people, they're not just going to keep ripping off wins. In the second half, as you already alluded to, the back half of this schedule is going to be brutal. They're going to go to Miami for a Thursday night game, and the same amount of respect that I gave the Vikings with the Steelers traveling there on a short week, road trips are not friendly for the away teams on Thursday Night Football. I think the Miami Dolphins can punch them in the mouth. They get a mini bye. They have to go back to Chicago. Okay, they could beat the Bears. We don't know what the Bears are going to be. Andy Dalton, Justin Fields. Oh, jeez, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter with either one of those. So I have win-loss, win when we're looking at the Vikings, Dolphins, and then the Bears. And even with the Bears being a little bit of a road trip here, I don't think it's that big of a game, and I don't know. I think the Bears are on a shoestring here. It's amazing. They've given their GM and coach a second chance here with a whole other new quarterback after the Mitch Trubisky debacle. So, yeah. Dalton has a history of beating the Ravens if he's the guy, though, but he also has a history of throwing the ball in the row 6.
I'd be genuinely surprised if Justin Fields isn't starting by week 11 by the time the Ravens and Bears play. In my mind, I really view him as he's going to be the guy whenever he's ready, and all reports, obviously it's been football in shorts up to this point, but all reports seem to indicate that he's grasping stuff, cerebrally pretty well at this point. So I think it gives him the best chance to win, even without seeing him play, just knowing what Andy Dalton has been since he left Cincinnati. But I agree with you. I think Miami's a tough out. I think they're well coached. They have one of the best defenses in the NFL. They have one of the best special teams units in the NFL. I think Brian Flores is a very underrated coach, and I think they're going to ride or die with Tua and see what happens. I think when Tua is on, they can be a very good competitive team with the Patriots and the Bills in the AFC East. If Tua is off, and we see where he was off at times last year to the point where he got benched multiple times, there's not the luxury of benching him. You don't have Ryan Fitzpatrick at this point to fall back on like he did last year. So I really think you're going to have to ride or die with him, and you can't keep just benching him, because at that point then you got to let him fly. You got to let him go face that adversity, whether for right or for wrong. And they added weapons, drafting Jalen Waddle and guys like that to try to give them someone to really get things going.
Fuller too.
Will Fuller, they're giving him pieces to be successful. Mike Gesicki, has started to really come into his own as a tight end. It wouldn't surprise me if he really takes that big jump this upcoming year. Defense is very good, depending on what happens with Xavier Howard, obviously. But in reality, that's a very good team, and they're very well coached, and they're doing a lot of the right things. Just is Tua the answer? And I think on a short week, on the road, prime time, that could very easily be not a trap game for the Ravens, because I don't think the Dolphins are going to be below 500 at that point in time. I think they're going to be a very good team, but it wouldn't surprise me seeing them lose that. So for me, if they're going to lose, I don't envision them losing to Minnesota. I struggle to pick Minnesota against most teams just because of the fact that I don't. What are they? Is Dalvin Cook going to be healthy? Are they going to have health up front? Can Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson do enough to make it happen? Can Adam Thielen do enough to make it happen? I don't know. So in my mind, until I see what the Vikings are, they could easily beat a team. We saw them beat teams last year with Dalvin Cook. Can they do it consistently? I don't know. In my mind, the Ravens would get that one, especially when it's at home, coming off a bye. And obviously, like I said, Chicago I think is a win, because I just think that even with Justin Fields, if he's playing at a high level at that point in time, the Bears they don't do anything for me. They don't move the needle very much.
No, not at all. And I mean, my logic here is just I'm going with the kind of the X factor of they're on a bye. They have the game at home. We won again. We're sitting on, what do we got them at now? 7-1. And then you got to go to Miami on a short week, so you have a road trip. You have another road trip. Then they host the Cleveland Browns right after Turkey Day, another primetime game. And we gave them the W here. We were doing the home and home thing with this, as we did with a lot of the AFC North before. They end up with an AFC North slate of playing at home against the Browns and then going to Pittsburgh and then Cleveland. And I think that's where we start to see this unravel a little bit. Okay, they got back on track. They had a loss. Now they got 2 wins. Chicago, they squeak one out against the Browns. They got to go to Pittsburgh, who has had Lamar Jackson's number countless times already. This will be a huge game in Pittsburgh, no doubt about it. December football, provided everyone's healthy at this point. That's the Donnybrook, that's the slugfest, that's the slobber knocker, that's all of them right there. Because of that fallout and playing that, that'll be a national 425 game as well. So they go primetime 425. They got to go back up to Cleveland at 1 o'clock right after that. And I think the Browns will have it figured out, and their fans are going to be hungry for revenge. Their team's going to be hungry for some payback. I see another loss. Green Bay Packers, they come back home. They're going to host them. And, of course, it's still the Aaron Rodgers debate. If it's an Aaron Rodgers team, Aaron Rodgers ain't going to be fazed by weather. These teams will match up well. It's another premier team that's been in, back-to-back NFC championships. So I could see them dropping 3 straight in a row before they go on the road to Cincinnati. We gave them, I think, both games against Cincinnati, right? Yes, we did before that. So I see the 3-game slide. Maybe they get a little corrective against the Bengals on the road before having 2 final games at home. Rams and Steelers. We gave them the home one, the final game of the week, final game of the year, Week 18 against the Steelers. That Week 17, though, I could coin flip that. I don't know what the Rams are at this point. Rams got to go on the road, West Coast travel. Will they be in playoff contention? Will this game mean more to the Rams than it will the Ravens? And of course, against the Steelers, we don't know who's going to be sitting. Are they really going to care? Is there going to be any positioning here? Will it all be like sewn up and we know what it is and everyone's sitting players? Or will this be a de facto AFC North championship game with the 2 top teams battling each other? Don't know. So that kind of, I know I went and I jumped right through Cleveland, Pittsburgh, Cleveland, Green Bay, Cincinnati, LA Rams, and then Pittsburgh Steelers one more time. That's kind of the way I see it playing out for the back half. That's why I say it's more of a brutal schedule, because I see them dropping at least 4, if not 5, losses following the bye week.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely it's a gauntlet for them there. You know, I think they do beat Cleveland there. You know, I do believe that, you know, obviously we talked about this previously. I think they split that. I think they win that first one. You know, I think it's always a slugfest with the Steelers and Ravens. You know, being in Pittsburgh, like if the Steelers are healthy, if the Ravens are healthy, like I don't see either team sweeping the other team at this point. Obviously, if the Steelers end up and the national media is right and the Steelers suck, you know, then that's a different conversation. But I think right now with how I feel the Steelers will be, and that's a wild card caliber team. You know, I think that they could very easily split 50-50 and, you know, pick your poison. Is it week the first time they play, second time they play? In my mind, the first time they play, I think will be the Steelers. I think the Steelers will have the easier AFC North matchup the week before because the Steelers are playing the Bengals in Cincy, whereas the Ravens, even though they're playing at home, have the Browns. I think that will be a more up-tempo match compared to what the Steelers are going to have with the Bengals in that week leading into this Ravens game. You know, so for me, I think if they drop to Pittsburgh, now you're going versus Cleveland versus Pittsburgh and going back to Cleveland. Like that's tough. And I think that even though they beat Cleveland the first time, I don't think they sweep Cleveland. You know, even though they've swept Cleveland in the past, I just think if situations were differently, they could potentially sweep Cleveland here. I just don't see them doing it. You're looking 3 straight AFC North games in a row, 2 of which are on the road back to back, and 2 of them are against Cleveland, who, you know, if they're not anything, they're physical, you know, so like that's going to be tough. Green Bay, I think, again, if Devontae Adams and Aaron Rodgers are playing, it's a whole different outlook. Who knows if they're playing? You know, all the stuff coming out with Devontae Adams in this contract situation, who knows? But
DeAndre Hopkins screwed that up quite a bit, didn't he?
Yeah,
it's the kind of deal he's got.
It's going to be crazy how these guys get their deals moving forward. And, depending on how, now that all talks are apparently off between Devontae Adams and the Packers, who knows what happens there. And then you look further on beyond just the fact that Aaron Rodgers is there. Aaron Rodgers is there. This is a winning football team. Like the Packers don't have an elite defense by any means, but they have good talent. Jair Alexander, guys like that. They got the Smash Brothers up front. On the Zadarius Smith and Preston Smith. They got guys. It's not like they don't. And obviously they have a very good offense. Even losing Corey Linsley at center, like they still have guys up front that can get the job done. And Aaron Jones be coming back. Him being the guy. Like they have pieces there, and I'm not going to bet against the Packers most weeks, as long as Aaron Rodgers is there. If he's not there and it's Jordan Love, I have no idea because I don't know what Jordan Love is. So I'm not going to make those assessments, but I think the Packers are a loss there as well for the Ravens. And at that point, you're looking at 3 drops in a row. So for me at that point, then you get Cincinnati, and it's tough for Cincy as well because I really don't know what Cincy's going to be either. With Joe Burrow coming back, adding the pieces that they added, they could very well be a competitive football team. I think they're going to be a tough 4th place team. I think they might be the best last place team in the NFL this year in terms of division standings. But I still think the Ravens just get their number. I think the Bengals are about another year away from being there. And I think that's going to really, like we talked about in the Bengals podcast, who is Zach Taylor? Is Zach Taylor on the hot seat after this year? Are they going to give him more time to really cultivate Burrow? Or are they going to sit there and say, okay, we went under 500 again with Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow is going to be going into year 3, which is a huge year for quarterback development in the NFL. Is he the guy? Is Zach Taylor going to be the guy that we want leading Joe Burrow into his future? That's going to be, until we see that. I still think the Bengals are the Bengals. I think they're an improving team. I like the pieces they have there, but it comes down to health, comes down to availability, comes down to Zach Taylor, comes down to, is Joe Burrow going to take steps forward? And I like the Rams winning this game. I think Matthew Stafford is a better quarterback and a better talent than Jared Goff is. I think he's a better fit for what the Rams want to have as an identity. They have the Rams, even without Cam Akers now being out for the year, they still have a great offensive line. They still have weapons out wide. They still have great tight end play. They still have backs that can make it work. Darrell Henderson, they're not going to add a running back because of how confident they feel Darrell Henderson. Maybe they add another body after the camp cuts. And then the defense, as long as they have Aaron Donald and Jalen Ramsey, they're going to be fine. It's I like the Rams a lot. I think the Rams are going to be just as battle tested as any of the AFC North teams because I think the NFC West is the best division in football. I think any 4 of those teams can win that division. So I really think the Rams will be a tough out, and I just think that at that point, that's a stretch, man. Cleveland, at Pittsburgh, at Cleveland, Green Bay, at Cincinnati, and then you get a non-conference game with the Rams, who at that point wins and losses are probably going to matter a hell of a lot more than they are for the Ravens because of how the NFC West is probably going to shake out. I think they're going to come out with some juice, and then knowing that the Ravens have the Steelers again the following week, I'm not saying they're going to be looking past that Rams game, but it's going to be tough, man. So in my mind, I really think the Rams. I'm not saying the Rams are a better football team than the Ravens. I just think given the circumstances, that's going to be a tough game for the Ravens at that point. So I really think that's going to be a loss when it's all said and done. And then, like I said, I think they split. So me giving the Steelers the win the first time around, I give the Ravens a split the second time around. And I think that's how they finish the season. And again, I think you see a logjam at the top of that AFC North with those 3 teams because I think it could go any way, plus or minus a couple games. So,
I think I heard us respecting the Browns quite a bit in there.
Almost like I respected the Browns in the last video, and somehow that turned into us not knowing what we're talking about and us doing whatever. I'm pretty sure that you mentioned my love of Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, and I'm pretty sure I sat there and said multiple times they have the best offensive line, they have the best run game, they have a great stable of receivers, their defense is unproven, and no argument on that because 9 of these guys weren't here last year.
Oh, so no, that's no big deal whatsoever.
Do I like JOK? Yeah, I wish the Steelers would have drafted him. Do I like John Johnson and those guys they had from the Rams? Yeah, but again, you're just assuming that these guys are coming together and all of a sudden be, the 85 Bears. It's we don't know that yet. They're not going to be the steel curtain. We don't know that yet. Could they? Yes. And I don't care what any Browns fan says Baker, they're going to ride or die with Baker. And I don't think that Baker is quite at the level where I'm sitting there saying, yeah, he's your franchise guy, got to pay him, let's go. I think that he's a game manager. I think he's a very good game manager. I think the second half of last year, as he kind of settled into what Stefanski wanted for him, that's what you're going to get out of Baker. He's going to be able to control the game, make the throws he needs to, but if you put the game on his shoulders and all of a sudden you're looking at 40, 50 passes a game, something's going wrong there. And I'm not trusting him to win a game in that capacity. But I'm not saying he can't win, and I'm not saying the Browns can't win the division, because I think they have just as good of a chance of winning the division as anybody else does. So somewhere along the way, any Browns fans listening to this, I don't know where you got that podcast twisted, because I thought we both respected the Browns, and then newsflash, we disrespected the Browns again in this podcast. So
yeah, well,
selective hearing is what it is.
Well, yeah, there's a little bit of that. I think it was like 50 games of Myles Garrett, 42.5 sacks, and he has something like, I want to say 25 and 25, or like 23 and 25, and that's exactly half as many when he plays games in November, December. Not quite as effective in the later half, but I need to respect him and put him up there with,
he's up there with T.J. Watt, Aaron Donald, all those guys. Yeah.
He was a top overall pick. He's the guy that, like, when we sat here and the Browns were absolutely the de facto worst team in the NFL, we said it would be dumb not to take him. And we knew he was just great, but I take a look at the defensive line. Again, I had these arguments on Twitter just recently, the same thing, and everybody, it was just like, I'm not even going to bring this up anymore, but you have, in the secondary alone, Denzel Ward usually misses a quarter of the season. And you have Grant Delpit, who didn't play last year. He's a first-year player. John Johnson is completely brand new and was the play caller with L.A. Is he in the same capacity here? Or are you giving that to whoever plays inside linebacker? Or will that inside linebacker be Owasu or whatever, Koromora, JOK, a rookie, another new guy? Is it going to be Mac Wilson surprised me there more than what we thought he would probably be as a pro. But again, this is the argument me and Noah had about Vince Williams. The Browns are looking for somebody other than Mac Wilson every single year. The interior defensive linemen, actually 3 of the 4 other than Garrett, are all brand new. One of those guys hasn't played a snap since 2019, Andrew Billings, and he's not even with the original team that drafted him. He's been in the league, 4 years, and hasn't made much of a peep.
Wouldn't even surprise me if Tommy Togiai was starting over him by at some point in time, and he's a rookie. I'm
an Ohio State guy, but it's like that's not a name that jumps at me to get all excited about. Would we be hyping him here with the Steelers? I don't know. It'd be like me hyping Chris Wormley. That's what I'm looking at as a baseline comparison here. I think Olivier Vernon is a better pass rusher than Jadeveon Clowney. Yep. Jadeveon Clowney's probably going to get his quarterback hits. He's probably going to at least put some pressure in, and that's probably going to help Myles Garrett more than it's going to help, I think, Jadeveon Clowney's case here.
And he's great against the run for teams like the Ravens as well. That's one thing I will give Jadeveon Clowney. Yeah. He's very effective against the run, but against the pass, he's been – overall, his game's been lackluster the last couple seasons. He's running off of name recognition more than anything at this point.
Yeah, and I understand that. You're looking at you want to get after – everybody wants to get after the quarterback, and everybody needs a quarterback. That's the cat and mouse game in the NFL, but you got to be able to beat the teams that are within your own division. And for some reason, I look at the Bengals and I look at their defense, and I'm kind of like, maybe they're put together a little better. I don't know, especially on the in the secondary. So, these are all things you got to play the games in order to see it. And it's like, yeah, okay, now I'm putting disrespect. Our 2%ers that are still listening this far, how far did we get with the Ravens? I had 11 wins other than the Rams game, which I said could be a coin flip. That's 11 wins if we put that as a loss as well. And that's what we said would be exactly what you might need in order to win the AFC North division crown. That would be more than what we've given the Steelers on paper and the Browns on paper, by the way, as well. It could even be 12. So we kind of have a plus and minus maybe there with one of these other games. The back end of the schedule looks particularly rough. We'll see how their defense comes together as well. I think they have some pieces, but I don't think they have as many question marks. Like we're saying, 9 players with the Browns, and free agents aren't necessarily. Sometimes free agents are great players in a great system. They go to another team, Le'Veon Bell, and then they don't do what they get paid to do somewhere else. Some of the guys end up being great somewhere else. It's just that the other team, they drafted them, can't keep them. That might be Bud Dupree in Tennessee. Bud Dupree could be a colossal flop in Tennessee. So, I mean, it's two sides of the coin. We don't know these type of things. We got to wait and see. We're making somewhat educated guesses as best we can. Those are a little bit of homer bias on this. Well, clearly not. We don't think that the Steelers are going to be winning more games than the Ravens at this point. We do acknowledge that. There's a few spots here on the schedule that probably favor the Ravens more than it does on the Steelers' schedule. It has to deal with the arrangement of home and away games, bye weeks, Thursday night football, primetime games, things of that nature factor in just as much as whoever that opponent is. That's why I still look at Denver here, and I'm like, Denver could be the surprise here also, like just in the middle of this. Or they come back from Denver and they're gassed and they play the Colts, but they got an extra day to maybe figure that out, and it's a primetime game. But anything that's like a disruptive, they're not doing 9 to 5. It's the same thing I say about the Steelers getting screwed with the schedule and the COVID stuff last year, which now all of a sudden it's going to be forfeits. I just think the NFL doesn't want to make any concessions.
No.
How hard are they going to stick to that? And it'll be interesting to see, because the thing that sticks out to me is you're going to give a team a forfeit, and I don't want to bring up all this pandemic and COVID and everything else, and everybody's brother and their brother's friend's cousin's uncle who has a locker next to whatever heard this about this. Everybody has an opinion on it, but even vaccinated people are still contracting this. So I'm like, okay, now what happens? And I think they were saying something that maybe it's just unvaccinated. I don't know. The whole rigmarole with that. Let's just hope they got through. They played every game last year. But I bring this up because the Steelers played a very unconventional 3:40 kickoff on a Wednesday where a lot of people couldn't even see the game against the Ravens. And the Ravens were depleted, and the Steelers have to throw in a few guys because you get guys going to COVID list like Pouncey. So you have J.C. Hassenauer playing center, and there was just a whole lot of disruption that led eventually to the Steelers playing on 5 days rest against Washington football team that they had. They were up against 10-0 or whatever, and Alex Smith holds on to the football. And now it's fresh in my mind because somebody brought it up to me recently, and I've mentioned it on the last 2 shows. They were allowed to get that field goal, and that changes the whole script later when Washington kind of closes in this stuff. You have the point is, these are all these silly things that can happen. Referee blows a call. Anything could hinge on this. It really can. But at this point, X's and O's, black and white, as much as we could factor into this. Okay, Ravens are there with 11 wins, and the Steelers maybe with 10. We have plus and minuses all over. We think the Browns can also be double-digit, but do we think the Browns can be an 11-win team, 12-win team, and overthrow the Ravens? They're going to have to sweep them.
Yeah, I think
in 3 weeks, no less, with the Steelers in the middle of all that.
Yeah, I think
the Steelers in the middle of that for the Ravens, I should say.
For sure, yeah. I think the biggest thing that we talked about before was really just those AFC North matchups, especially with even including the Bengals. Like, that's what's going to dictate the positioning here. You know, do the Browns sweep the Steelers? Do they sweep the Ravens? If they do, then yeah, they're an 11, 12-win team come, January. Do they get swept by the Ravens like we've seen them do in the past, even as recently as last year? Do we see them get swept? Yeah, I mean, it's possible, and that happens. That's games down against you. Do they get swept by the Steelers? Browns fans will say, heck no. They're going to sweep the Steelers. Like, in reality, very seldom do we see any AFC North team sweep another AFC North team. It happens, but now with like the competitive nature of the division, I doubt it. I doubt you're going to see a situation where you get swept or another team gets swept. It wouldn't surprise me at all if like the 3 teams all split 1-1 against each other, because like that's just I think that's where the division's going. And
then as you say that, the Bengals get swept by everyone.
Yeah, and maybe they do.
Which isn't realistic either. But
no, because the Bengals, I mean, they won against the Steelers last year. They've been competitive against the Browns in recent years, even when the Browns were starting to get some of that mojo back with Baker. So like, it could go either way, and there's no real way of knowing at this point in time. But I do think that in reality, when it comes all down to it, you're going to see a position where the Ravens, the Steelers, and the Browns, all have the opportunity to be double-digit win teams. And I think they all really are going to be pushing towards that point. Like I said, it wouldn't surprise me if one of them, being like the Browns, were a double win. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if you flip them. Like, there's no order that is going to surprise me except for Cincinnati Bengals being number 1 team in the division. Yeah. That is the one order that would surprise me. Even if the Bengals somehow crept their way up to be like a 7-win team or an 8-win team, that's possible too. Like, they could be right there in the thick of all the conversations of playoffs, and like that wouldn't surprise me, because I think that's the caliber that this division has. So in my mind, like, getting to 11 wins, like we talked about, like, fans hate hearing that because, like, no, we're going to go 13-4 or 14-3. It's like, winning 11 games in the AFC North, first of all, it doesn't matter anymore because unless you're the number 1 seed, you're not getting that bye week. And until someone unseats the Chiefs are going to be the favorite to be the number 1 seed every year. Mm-hmm. So like so at that point, it really doesn't matter as much anymore. Getting the number 2 seed, getting the number 3 seed, you win the division. That's what matters. You get the guaranteed home game. So like winning 11 games, I think, is enough to win the division. I'd be stunned if the division winner this year had 12 or more wins. I just don't see it happening because I think all the teams are going to beat each other up. And I think all 3 of the teams have holes, or not even holes, but just question marks at places where we don't know in July and August what they're going to look like once they get on the field.
That happens if you have another 2019, like where Ben Roethlisberger was out, and your Mason Rudolph, Duck Hodges, let's say Lamar Jackson gets hurt, Ben Roethlisberger gets hurt, even Baker Mayfield gets hurt. Yeah. I mean, that's what you're looking at for the Bengals to maybe leapfrog there or something uncharacteristic to help. And we also mentioned well, the Steelers have the toughest schedule. Well, yeah, and so do the Ravens and the Browns. That's why we have everybody where we have. It's not like the Ravens are just going to juggernaut through this whole thing. I don't see it, and I've seen more regression. We talk about like hot seat teams too, or hot seat coaches. Definitely, John Harbaugh was on the hot seat before they just upended and changed their entire platform here in Baltimore. And I'm trying to bring it up. I almost had it here. You have 3 straight playoff appearances, but only 1 win there. And that's how hard it is to win in the postseason, too. So you're going to try and bring up the Mike Tomlin, well, he doesn't win, and they have all these things that happen. And he had the killer bees. Yeah, for like 1 whole playoff game that they have Ben, Brown, Bell, Bryant, all of them together, and it was against the Jaguars, and they didn't have Ryan Shazier, and they didn't have his backup either, and the defense just couldn't stop. They couldn't cover fullbacks and tight ends to save their life in that game. And turning the ball over, being too aggressive, 4th and whatever. You know what was interesting is I was looking at the Colts game last year with Phillip Rivers, and I don't see much of a difference between a Carson Wentz or a Phillip Rivers as far as pressure and turnovers, but Phillip Rivers blew it twice on 4th downs, trying to convert 4th and 1s and couldn't do it against the Ravens. The Ravens, they went in the halftime actually down against the Colts. So it's very easy to kind of flip the script there. There isn't a whole difference in talent, I think, from last year's Colts team to this year's Colts team. And I know you're a fan of the GM there also.
Chris Ballard.
Ballard, yeah. I was thinking Chris. I couldn't think of I was thinking Chris Pratt because I just watched that movie on Amazon Prime. No, not quite.
Not quite.
But there were 3 years there where Harbaugh completely missed getting into the postseason, and of course, one of those was a really bad 5-11, and there was 8-8, 9-7, and this is a team again, and a coach, 1 Super Bowl and only 1 real playoff win, I think, since then. I think he had maybe 2, one against the Steelers also when they were without, Le'Veon Bell, trying to run Ben Tate around out there. I think people have like short memories of how injuries impact a lot of these teams. Sometimes it's the healthiest, or you just happen to have depth and you got lucky at a certain position. You have somebody that jumps in there. And I was just watching Good Morning Football was talking about it too with the Steelers defense. I think one of the biggest things overlooked is that Devin Bush coming back is huge. Everyone talks about how big Devin White was with the Super Bowl champions there in Tampa Bay, and you got to give the same thing to Devin Bush. Will Patrick Queen be that same thing? Does Cleveland have that guy? Will it be John Johnson, or will it be one of the linebackers? There's a lot to be determined here. It's going to be fun to see how this plays out. We got a lot more training camp stuff that's coming through here. We'll finally have some public training camp stuff. Maybe one of us gets to put our eyeballs on this and give you the bird's eye view here. So it's going to be fun going forward. Zach, man, don't get too busy. These are fun discussions. this is one of the more fair, level-headed guys that everyone gives grief to because everyone wants to have a hot take. So glass half empty, glass half full. I'm probably even more biased because I still think that somewhere deep down with especially, and this was a Ravens show, Ravens have the organization too, even with Ozzie Newsome handing off the reins, and you still have Harbaugh there, you have ownership, you have that whole structure. And I know you like Andrew Berry. I know we think Kevin Stefanski is going to be maybe one of the better coaches that the Browns have had through there. They've had good coaches and they still screw it up, and that's the whole thing. You have that guy at the top, Jimmy Haslam, that could screw it up in a moment's notice, and that's the reason why there's more of a belief here that the Ravens are more in competition with the Steelers, but the Browns are right in there. We're not just totally dismissing them either. It's just we're not that Mario meme handing the crown over. You drop this king.
King.
No, we're not that far yet. Let's see Baker Mayfield put it together for another year. And then, of course, you talk about ownership and screwing up. Mike Smith and the Cincinnati Bengals, all bets are off there. And imagine if they made the wrong choice here with Jamar Chase again and taking a wide receiver and not protecting what could be your franchise quarterback in Joe Burrow. So this would be a lot of fun going forward. Make sure you come back and talk about this stuff, man. And we got some games and stuff coming up. We need to discuss more often. Even if we have to do this at 2 a.m. or whenever we could find time together, we're going to get this done. Yeah, I know. Because you're probably up at 6 or something. I don't get up
earlier than that. Yeah, it's early mornings, man. Early mornings, late nights. But we'll make it work. We'll make it work.
Absolutely. So thank you, man. Thanks for coming back.
Always a pleasure. And, to everybody, you said, there's half glass empty, half glass full. My perception is there's water in the glass. So, that's always my thing. I think fans sometimes overlook it and let their biases get in there. There's water in the glass. Is there not? That's the conversation point. I don't care if it's half full or half empty. There's water in it. So, it's a matter of just kind of trying to get through that stuff and acknowledging the fact that right now everybody is 0-0, and there's not going to be more than one team, if any, that goes 17-0. I think it's going to be even harder to go undefeated now that you have that extra game. So
absolutely
realize the fact that you can sit there and bash the Steelers. You can sit there and praise the Browns. At the end of the day, they've played exactly 0 games. And we don't know how good the Steelers' offensive line is going to be. We don't know how good the Browns' defense is going to be or how good Baker Mayfield is going to be. We don't know how good Lamar Jackson is going to be. We don't know any of that because it's 2021. It's a new season, and nothing has happened yet. So let the chips fall where they may, and just look forward to the fact that football's back, and hopefully we get some fans in the stands again. And we can actually enjoy normal football. So
tailgating too, man. Firing up the grill when it's like a nice, cool 70-ish degrees always gives me the football goosebumps. You got to have some AC/DC Thunderstruck opening up the game.
Yes, sir.
Right at kickoff there. And speaking of water in the glass, there was a cliche that everyone loves a winner. It seems more or less like anymore sports media, it's like no one loves the winner. We're waiting for the downfall of the winner. Although the Buccaneers are now the shiny new toy, and then of course it's like, well, we've bet up against Tom Brady so many times. Do you want to insert your foot in your mouth one more time betting
Might
against
as well
them?
do it again.
But it was the Patriots.
Until he's 45. Do it.
Yeah, it's the Patriots. He's going to be George Blanda Jr. here. Maybe he'll start punting and he can play into his 50s.
Yep.
Lost my train of thought there, but it's been the Patriots. It was like, when was the downfall of the Patriots dynasty ever going to be? And they would go 2-2 in September, and it's like, this is it, it's over. And they're doing that with the Steelers now, and Ben Roethlisberger and Mike Tomlin, because they're all the old guard. And then you got the shiny new toy, which is the Cleveland Browns. They finally win a playoff game. They do it over the Steelers. So it's those narratives play off of each other because it's the most recent thing that you can go off of and remember and speak of. And everybody wants to see, it's almost like you want to see the team win until they do. They'll start turning on the Chiefs soon enough here as well.
At some point.
Yeah, and they've done it with the Seahawks, and everybody wanted to see the Cowboys lose for the longest time, and then they haven't won anything for like 20 years. So eventually, is that turning around, and they're starting to get that? That's like the next big thing, you know what I mean? So it's always like you want to see one of these franchises, Lions, Jets. Are they going to turn it around? Jaguars. These things are exciting. They're new. They're fun to talk about, but there's still a consistency there. There's certain teams in the NFL that just aren't total rubbish. period. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Steelers are there. I put the Ravens there in that conversation. I put the Chiefs there in that conversation. You're on the other side of the conference. It's the Seahawks and the Packers and some teams like that. And I'm sure there's a few I left out. Don't roast me on it. It's just to get into that conversation, you have to have some consistency. And that's the reason why I feel the way I do about these various schedules. And we'll see how it all plays out. Could the Browns certainly get there? Yeah, they could start building momentum and building that and keep building on that roster and building on that momentum over the next few years. But again, I'm a guy, I got to see it to believe it. I mean, I'm trying to be fair with the Steelers too. I mean, I didn't give them 14 wins, so I got to stop defending myself. I think it's pretty clear cut, but I keep repeating myself on this because then I have to repeat myself in the comment section. Which don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. That is the Professor Zach Metkler, wearing many hats, one of which is an Allegheny Gators one right now. Best of luck to you and your season, sir. My name's Joe Kuzma. I got the training cap hat on because I'm looking forward to finally getting to see some football action in person as well. So as always, we're going to sign off here. I already told you, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Thank you, 2%ers. Thank you, those of you who review and rate the show. And as always, we encourage everyone out there to, each time, be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.